Hey y'all, how are you doing? I'm great. Thank you so much for asking. It's me, Kim, and I'm back for another patrons only video. So, one thing that I love about doing my own thing and being my own boss is I can have an idea on Saturday and make it happen on Sunday. So, that's why we're here. So, I mentioned in the last video that the video that I wanted to make was I wanted to talk about what happened in my life after my father died. So I talked in the I failed out of Harvard video about my father died. I failed out of school. I was out of school for 2 years and then I went back and finished. But I skipped those 2 years, and those are an important 2 years. In fact, I would say that those 2 years are the most important of my life so far. Outside of my college experience, which was transformative and wonderful, those 2 years were after I had failed out and had to get a job and had to go to therapy, completely changed the trajectory of my life. And I haven't discussed that. And I just thought it would be interesting for me just personally to go through, but also if you're going through some shit, if you in some shit, if you're trying to deal with grief, I thought, okay, well, let's just, let's get it all out there. But then yesterday I was scrolling Instagram and I saw a woman talking about how therapeutic coloring was for her. And I thought, oh, I want to try that. I want to try coloring therapy. And you know that I'm in an ongoing quest to stave off seasonal affective disorder. I am very, very affected by changes in the weather. When it gets dark and cold outside, it is so hard for me to be a productive member of society. But I'm grown. I cannot hibernate for 4 months. It's just not an option. In fact, I actually think one of the reasons why I didn't do great in school, one was because my dad died, but also because it is so dark and so cold and so rainy in Cambridge. It was impossible for me to operate at a 10. I feel like for most of my college career, just academically, I was operating at like a 7. And it's hard when it's raining and you gotta buy rain boots and the sun sets at 4. Oh, horrible. So I went and found a woman who makes her own coloring pages. I already had colored pencils, crayons, and colored pencils. So I thought that I would sit and color with y'all because I bought the commercial license to the coloring pages. So I can legally share it, so you can download the coloring pages. You can color along, color on your own time. So instead of like a get ready with me, this is like a color with me. I've already kind of started on this one. Just a little bit. I'm really not a great colorer, by the way. You know how some people just have like that visual arts thing? I've never had that. I've been so jealous of people who have that. So I'm gonna tell this story and I'm also gonna color. So print out the pages, color with me, color on your own time. I'm gonna do this again. So maybe by the time I do this again, you'll have the pages printed out and we can color together. Has anybody done this before? I feel like I'm an innovator here, okay? I feel like we're onto something. Let's go ahead and get done. So, my father died 10 years ago. Was it 10 years ago? No, almost 11 years ago. And I say all the time, it changed my DNA, but I refused to initially really deal with it. I soldiered on, I pretended like everything was okay, but everything wasn't okay. So eventually got to the point where I wasn't doing work, I wasn't going to class, I wasn't turning in papers, and I failed out of classes. And the policy at Harvard is if you fail 2 classes, you've got to take some time off. Now, the woman who was in charge of the academic and emotional well-being of everybody in our house, how Harvard uses the houses system like Harry Potter, she knew that I was dealing with some emotional upheaval. So usually the stipulations are if you're just a regular person who fails, the stipulations are you have to be out for a year, 2 semesters, and you have to keep a job so that they'll know that you're stable. stable enough to come back. For me, because of what I had gone through and, the struggles that she saw me having was you have to keep a job for 6 months, I think, just one job continuously for 6 months. And you have to go to therapy, I think for at least 6 months, but maybe for a year. And as I mentioned in that other video, I was relieved because I was faking it. I was faking it so hard and it was just getting too difficult. It was getting too difficult to pretend like I was okay. It was such a burden. And I didn't know how to release that burden. And I would have never addressed it if I hadn't been forced to go home. Okay, so that was the end of the school year after my junior year. My father died in fall of sophomore year. I was trying to keep up appearances until spring of junior year. So, but while I was avoiding doing any kind of schoolwork, because that was just too much emotionally for me, I was putting my energy into thinking up this website idea, because I've mentioned other places that, in the Story of For Harriet video, was always into the internet, always into blogs, always into websites. So it's like, okay, well, I'll use this work. Any workaholic knows I'm gonna use this work to take my mind off or avoid. Really, it's avoid, because avoidance was my big thing with anxiety. Avoid everything that's happening around me. I'm going to focus my energy on this project, which was the website for Harriet. And so while I was going through all that shit, I managed to launch the website for Harriet in June of 2010. Okay, so literally a week after I'd been kicked out of school, we'll say forced to return home, okay, I launched For Harriet. It makes no fucking sense, but that's how my crazy brain works. So the website is up. We have contributors, and then I have to go home. Initially, when I have to go home, I tell my mom, I'm just going to come home for the summer, because we don't have a close relationship. It's a little better now, but back then it was worse. And so I just wasn't in a position to tell her that I had been politely asked not to return in the fall. And so I went home. I was working on For Harriet. Did not have a job. I was just working on For Harriet every day. My mom was very skeptical, very, very skeptical. She would just be like, what is this? What are you doing? It's never going to help you. And in my mind, I was just like, I think it is, though. Thankfully, that worked out for me. Okay, so we're going to skip. Eventually, a letter comes in the mail addressed to my mom. And it's from Harvard College. And I intercept it, but I realize at some point, we're going to have a conversation about the fact that and I'm faking it again, still faking it, still lying, okay? So all summer, I'm at home, living up in my mom's house, faking it and pretending like, oh yeah, can't wait for September. Senior year, yep, I'm ready. Yeah, girl, graduation, just lying. Because I knew it wasn't gonna happen. But eventually, a letter comes in the mail. It outlines the fact that I cannot return to the fall. It outlines the requirements that I need to fulfill to demonstrate that I'm going to be able to be in a good place to return to the fall. And I realized in around August, we got to have a conversation. So I told my mom that I have been politely asked not to return to the fall, and much to her credit, I don't have a sitcom mom, but she didn't freak out. My mom is very pragmatic. I really think that that's where I get it from. Incredibly ambitious, hard worker, very pragmatic, not a meltdown person, but also kind of an emotionally detached person, right? So it's like very much able to think rationally about these situations that are pretty big. It's a pretty big deal when your kid tells you, you think that we're going to, and I had to do it. Oh, I think I remember this. I remember I had to do it before we got into like booking plane tickets to go back to Boston. So like at the very last minute, I was just like, okay, so this is the situation. That was crazy, girl. And then it's also like, it's so funny being older because like I can now think of like, 10 years removed from this, I can just think of what she must have been thinking and going through. It was crazy. But she didn't freak out, so shout out to her. And she, I remember she called in my aunt, my older aunt, and they're like the closest, as like an intermediary. An intermediary is the word that I'm looking for. And we sat down. I remember sitting down on our back porch, and it was me, my mom, and my aunt. And my mom was like, okay, well, we need to make a plan for what's going to happen over this year. And like, now that I think about it, I've given my mom some shit because she was not, I needed a different type of parent, I think all children need to be parent. I think I needed a different type of parent than what she could be. And that's not 100% her fault, but I still suffered. And so I had a lot of resentment about that. But when I think back about what happened during that time, she handled it very well. So we sat down, we planned it out. You're going to get a job. We're going to go to therapy. You're going to, be a productive person, and we're going to make sure that you get back on track. I don't know. Just thinking about that, I don't know. It makes me a little bit emotional. It was such a... Kimberly, are you going to cry? Oh my God. No, I'm not. But it was, I get emotional. I'm sorry. I got to get some tissue. I get emotional thinking about the state of emotional upheaval that I was in. It's hard. I think that being that age is hard anyway, Being like a young person, I'm not a girl, I'm not yet a woman. Like, that's hard anyway. But, sorry. Sorry. But just all of that, it was just a lot. It was just so much. And I'm crying not just because of that, but also because I recognize that, like, if I'd had a different situation, my entire life would have been derailed, Because a lot of people don't have, families who can take care of them. They don't have families who can sit down and plan. They don't have families who can, like, take the financial burden of somebody who is technically an adult in their home and not contributing. And people don't have family who has the desire to do that. So I am really grateful. Gosh, okay. So anyways. So that fall, I knew in my mind what I had to do, but I wasn't in an emotional state, like a mental state to like be focused or whatever. But after a few months at home, most of the people, I didn't really have any friends. My best friends are my college roommates, and I have said before that I was really lonely in my childhood, and like my childhood best friend from high school, she was moved away. She was in college. So I really was isolated. I didn't have friends. I was so lonely. And then, but I knew that like I had to, and also I don't have a mom. I do have, a black mom. So she was like, okay, but you got to do something. Okay. You've got to do something. So, one of my aunts let me use one of her extra cars. And so I got a job. Oh my God, this is so crazy to talk about. I got a job. My first job when I was home was at a dry cleaner. Yeah. It was at a dry cleaner, and I worked with a racist white man and a racist white woman. They were so racist, and like it was really one of those textbook situations. They looked at me as the exceptional negress, like, oh, she's one of the good ones, she went to Harvard. But they used to say the most racist shit. They were so racist against Mexicans, because where I'm from, like, there's lots of Mexican people, just outwardly. And I was just trying to get through, collect my little damn paycheck, okay, and get the fuck out of there. And I literally, and what's so crazy is, I had networks, in my home. So the only thing that I would do after I moved home was like stay in the house, lay in the bed, work on For Harriet, and go to church. That's the only thing. But I knew I needed to get a job, also because I was broke. I had no money. I needed money, you know? But also because I needed to get a job in order to be able to go back to school. So, the thing is, like, my mom was trying to be like, okay, well, we know so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. Like, apply for this job, apply for that job. And I had just had no motivation to apply for any jobs. And these would have been good jobs, girl. They would have been good jobs because we knew people. We're really, you know, I have a huge family. I had, you know, it's not prominent family, but it's a big family that's pretty known. And like, my aunt is like a socialite. I mean, everybody knows her. Everybody loves her. She's an AKA. I won the AKA pageant when I was a senior in high school. It would have been easy for me to plug into those networks, but I was depressed and I was ashamed and I didn't want to do anything and I didn't want to make any follow-up calls and I didn't want to fill out any applications. I was just not a functioning member of society. I was not in a place. And so, you know, they would be like, oh, this man at the bank said that you can be a teller. And I was like, I'm not doing that. Just being ornery and being depressed and being lazy. It was just all those things, right? And like, I would say 25% of it was me, but like 75% of it was mental illness, you know? So one day, I realized that I was broke and I needed money and that maybe eventually I would want to go back to Harvard. So I used to eat Chick-fil-A every single day. And so next to the Chick-fil-A that I used to go to, I saw a help wanted sign and it was at a dry cleaner. And so I one day went in, filled out the application. The owner's name was David. Oh my God, I remember this. He was an old white man and he looked at it and he said, "You're hired." So I filled out, and this is like a history with me. I filled out one college application and that was it. I filled out one work application and that was it. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna work at this dry cleaner now. They were racist. It was just a dead end, mind numbing job at the dry cleaner. All we really had to do was organize the laundry when it came back from the dry cleaning plant, like hang it up in alphabetical order and check people out. Nothing, you know? But that's what I needed. I could not handle more than that. So, I stayed there and did nothing, and they were super racist, and, during that time is when I became, I realized that, like, I was super isolated, and I needed to do something with my energy, and so for me, like, whenever I think about community, I associate that with church. And so it's like, okay, well, because I have cousins, you know, I have a really big family. And I remember my cousins talking about like their church and what they do and, you know, and he was social and whatever. And we're the same age. He's like 6 months older than me. And so I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll just try out his church and what he's doing. And their church had a really like booming young adult ministry. So I decided to join that church and I became super, super active, back to my childhood days of going to church 2 and 3 times a week, much to, my mother loved it. She was loving my, like, so despite the fact that she like had lots of frustrations with me for being lazy and like being on the computer all day and taking this dead end job, she just loved that I was obsessed with church. And also, that's another thing about me. I do have an obsessive personality. So once I plugged into like being a part of this like young adult ministry at this church. Like I was in it. And then I became like a leader, and we're having meetings and we're doing parties, and like you hang out with the church people at church, and then you party with the church people at night. And then it's like, it was it was like a real thing. But also, so that was where I was getting my social stuff out, and I had to find a way to navigate the embarrassment, the isolation, the marginalization, the loneliness, but also I did not have like the movie kind of high school experience where you're having fun and you're going to parties and you're getting drunk for the first time. No, I was a nerd in high school, okay? I didn't do shit. I had my first boyfriend second semester, senior year of high school, but that was it. And so what I was recognizing, and so I finally kind of got to tap into that fun Kim in college. But I never experienced fun Kim at home in my home setting. And I was like, ooh, like, let's see how fun Kim is in Oklahoma. And so I went to church and became very like super like religious, not like Kanye, but just like super religious. And also it really was helping me. It was, when you get messages of reassurance from the pulpit, things are going to be fine. It's going to work out. You know, your name is victory. You're in the dark place right now, but you're going to come out of it. Like that stuff is very helpful when you are in the middle of some shit. So I understand people. That's one of the reasons why I don't condescend to religious people. One, because I understand how helpful that sort of stuff was for me when I was going through it, when I could not see a way out of the depression, when for most of my life up until I was 20, I had been so good at being able to see the future and be hopeful and be optimistic and be completely confident in my ability to live a great life. I had lost all of that. I'm trying to think. Something is... Oh, okay. This is coming back to me now. So yeah, so that's why I was super into it. But also, when I was going through it, one of the reasons why I, feel the way that I do about church communities is all church communities are not the same. There are some church communities that are very exploitative. And, the prosperity gospel preachers, I think, are really nasty and gross. But I didn't go to a church like that. I don't hail from those kinds of church communities. I come from the kinds of church communities that do community service and do after-school programs and feed the homeless and let people that run a food pantry and that, like, give out scholarships. Like, I come from church communities that literally, like, if you're a member, really, and maybe if you're not, but if you are a member, they really take care of you. And so, despite the fact that I was really just going through it and I was a mess and I wasn't doing shit and I wasn't living up to my potential, they really did take care of me. Once I joined my cousin's church, they really were so uplifting and supportive and kind and invited me in. Well, we'll get to the kind part, but for the most part, invited me in and welcomed me and, like, gave me a place to have fun and be social. I mean, that was a really important thing for me at that time. Because he was either that or laying up in the bed all day. Or going to the dry cleaner, 20 hours a week. And I'm really appreciative of that. So anyways, yeah, I was party Kim, going to clubs for the first time. And in college, we didn't go to clubs. So, so with my church friends, going to clubs, going to house parties, drinking. I didn't smoke at that. And I've actually never smoked, but they were all smoking and we were drinking and partying and staying up all night. Like, I don't know, just doing typical early 20s stuff. I just needed the opportunity to just be like a young person. I can put on my glasses now because I can't see. I needed that time to just be a carefree young person like spending your last $20 in the club, irresponsible person. That's who I was. And that was just so completely, it was a 180 from who Kimberly had been all up into that time. And it was fun. I had so much fun being irresponsible and doing stupid shit and driving under the influence. You shouldn't do that. You should not do that, but I definitely did. Do not endorse it. I've had a couple of very close calls, and actually, oh, this is a bummer, but one of my cousin's friends, and I started hanging out with my cousin's friends and other church people, one of his friends actually died in a drunk driving accident. So please do not drive drunk. That was a bummer. So anyway, so yeah, that was it. And then also dating. So I had gotten out, like, fun party came a little bit in college, like a little bit in those first 2-3 years. Okay, because my friends they like to have more fun than I do. I'll just be honest. Okay. But I had never really, like, dated. I did not date in college. People weren't really doing that. It was very few and far between. Okay, I'll say that about the social scene at Harvard. Okay, people do. Okay, it was definitely like a very hookup-y culture. A few people were in relationships, but it wasn't really dating. I have a whole story about how one of the dudes I thought I was dating was actually dating me and like 5 other people, and then we were in a John Tucker Must Die situation. It's a whole thing. But I had never, like, dated and had fun. And even my mom was like, you should, like, go out with men and find out what you like and find out what you don't like. So, ask and you shall receive. So Kimberly was out all night smoking. I mean, it was so bad, you know. We would stay up all night, literally get in on Sunday morning, like 6 a.m. after being out all night. And I would go to church the next morning, 3 hours later, be in church, hair still smelling like smoke from the club. And as stupid and crazy as that sounds, it was a fun time. It actually was. And then we were dating, and then we were all cooking up, and, you know. But then, you know, it kind of turned. It did kind of turn. So after a while, then you get into the dramas, and then I got into some weird dramas with some of the girls, and you know, then somebody would tell me, oh, so-and-so was talking about you behind your back, and she said you think you dress cute, and you don't dress cute, and you think you're pretty, and you're not pretty. This is happening with the church girls. Now, one thing about that is it was devastating. One of the men that I was dating, I mean, I was dating him, he wasn't dating me, okay? He wasn't shit. But he called me one day and said, after you left one of their little parties, so-and-so, actually, I'll say her name, Sherelle. I don't know if she's never gonna see this. I don't really care. Sherelle said, oh, somebody thinks she's pretty and she's not pretty, and she thinks she dresses cute and she doesn't dress cute. But, like, Sherelle was, like, in the group of girls that, like, we would go out every weekend. And I had no idea that, like, she didn't like me. And so as soon as I would leave the room, like, she would talk shit. I had never experienced that before. So anyways, this was the time where I was having so many firsts. You know, firsts that you're supposed to have when you're, like, 16. But I was having them when I was, like, 20, 21. So it was just a little bit delayed. And after that situation where he told me that and I, like, broke down and cried because I was like, oh, I thought we were really friends. That's when I was like, okay, Kim, you've got to do something else. Okay. But yeah, you know, dated boys at church, you know, men at church, and not boys because they were men, because I was 20, 21 at the time, and they're all older. Why men who are deep in church, why they be the worst ones? The most trifling. The worst. I was, so one time I hooked up with this dude, and I guess we were dating for a little bit. He was okay, but he was just around. I mean, we just dated because he was around. And then I met his brother, and I was like, shit, I should have gotten the brother. You know, have you ever had an experience where you're, like, with somebody, you've already hooked up with somebody, and then, like, the brother or the best friend or the line brother comes around, you'd be like, shit, I should have waited. Okay? Shit, did it too soon, chose too soon. So that was that situation. But I mean, he was nice enough. He just wasn't for me. We weren't compatible. He was just somebody to hook up with. And then I really started to like this other man who wasn't shit. He was just not shit. And he had a child. He wasn't shit. And he would text me once a week. Have you ever dated somebody who texts you once a week? And you'll be waiting on that text all week. And thankfully I had good discipline. So I would really like not text him in the week. But then he would text me once a week, and then I would just make up something in my mind to excuse that. Sis, if he's texting you once every 7 days, he's just not that into you. Okay? So 30-year-old Kim knows that, but 20-year-old Kim was like, well, he's busy, and he was in college, and he has a child. No. Ain't no excuses. There's no reason for that. So anyway, I was hooking up and dating and partying, and then eventually it's literally like I woke up out of a fog one day, But the reason why I was able to get to the point where one day I was able to like snap out of it was, in addition to having to work, one of the stipulations was to go to therapy. Now for the first year, I didn't do anything. It was like Kim was reclaiming her youth, going out, partying, drinking, hooking up. And I didn't really do anything that was going to get me closer to being able to go back to school that first year. I just wasn't in an emotional state, and I wasn't going to therapy at that time. But after a while, my mom was just like, I think I had these experiences where I realized that the friends that I thought I had were fake, and this life was just fake. And also, I worked at that dry cleaning place for a little while. And then I left because I was just like, these people they're bigots. They're bigots, And like, even though I was detached from myself I was like, I can't do this. So I eventually quit, and I started working. Where else did I work? I worked at, and then my aunt's car that she was letting me use broke down. So I didn't have a car anymore. But that was after I quit. But then I realized that the way that I quit, that they weren't going to give me the recommendation that I needed to go back to school. So I was going to have to find other jobs. So right around where I lived, there were like other places. So then I started working at the Payless near my home. And that was like, and Payless was like an okay job until one of the girls who was working with us, she started stealing. Okay. So then, stuff started ringing up short and merchandise was missing. She started stealing. So then when one person starts stealing and there's no like cameras around, everybody's a suspect, right? And so that makes your workplace horrible, because now they're like, every day they're like, oh, where's the money? And it's like, oh my God, girl, I'm just here so I don't get fined. I'm not stealing. Eventually they found out who it was. It was just like a really sweet, young mixed race girl. I felt really bad for her because I'm pretty sure she probably got arrested. But they found it out because they secretly installed security cameras in the store. And there were certain things that you were supposed to do in the store. And like one of them was, you're not supposed to sit down during your shift. You're always supposed to be out. You're supposed to be adjusting shoes. But like nobody did that. I used to sit down 3/4 of the day. Wasn't adjusting shoes. Did not care about the job at all. But unbeknownst to me, they'd installed cameras and they saw that we weren't doing anything. What I really got in trouble for was letting people use the coupons that we would have in store. So, this Payless doesn't exist anymore, right? So, Payless used to always have all these coupons, 10% off, 15% off, buy one, get one free. And we had a big storage of them. But it's like, I don't care. Like, why do I care if you pay full price? So I used to let people, I'd be like, oh, we have a coupon if you want to use it. But you're not supposed to do that. And so I got fired for sitting down too much. But really, I got fired for stealing. And the stealing was letting people use coupons. So I got fired, and they actually were like, we won't press charges if you pay back the money that you stole from us by letting people use coupons that they didn't bring into the store. So I had to pay them back like $100 or something like that. Fucking stupid. So anyways, that ended my tenure at Payless, and then I worked at Ross. And I think that the manager at Ross was also racist because I had to work in the back room at Ross. Ross Dress for Less is a discount store if you're not American or if you're unfamiliar. And that was the worst job I've ever had in my whole entire life. I'm a petite little girly girl. It was like unpacking boxes and lifting things and fixing the shelves. And so all the black women were in the back unpacking boxes and lifting stuff. And it was like so hard and so strenuous. And all the white girls were in the front checking people out. Racism. But anyways, it was the worst job. But that I got the Ross job at a point where I was like, Kim, it doesn't matter what happens at this job. You're going to stay here for these 6 months and you're going to get them to write you a letter. Okay? It doesn't matter. Okay? You've already wasted a year. You're going to stay here and get them to write you a letter. You're going to keep your head down. You're going to be in the back. Okay? And be with all the other black girls in the back, slaving away. And you're going to get this fucking letter of recommendation after 6 months. So I did. It was the worst job ever. It was so physically taxing. It was, we had to get up so early in the morning to like restock the shelves. So my mom, and this is another thing, you know, I gotta give her credit because I didn't have a car because I was too lazy to save and I'm irresponsible. So she would have to drive me to work super, super early in the morning. And I would be there until like 1 p.m. So get there at like 6 and get off at like 1 p.m. It was the craziest thing. I was explaining to somebody the work that I did at Ross and they were like, I cannot imagine you doing that. And I was like, I did it. I unpacked those fucking boxes. I hung up the clothes, put the clothes on the hangers. I moved heavy shit. It was strenuous. But that's also when working that job, and I had already started therapy at that time, but working that job also helps me to have an appreciation of the opportunities that I've had. So for so long, my mindset was, I'm smart. I did this all myself. My achievements are my own. I don't like anybody else trying to latch onto my achievements because my mom sometimes would say, we did this, and I'd be like, girl, you're not doing shit. I did it myself. You know, selfish shit, right? And after working at Ross and working with those women, I did not tell them when I was working there that I had gone to Harvard. I actually lied and said that I was going to the University of Oklahoma because there's just so many assumptions that people make about this pink is too light, I think, but we're just going to use it. You know, I know that there are lots of assumptions and I don't know, about like somebody who goes to Harvard and like who they are and what they are. And I just didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to answer the questions about why are you here? Oh, I also didn't mention that at Ross when all the black women were doing, the black and Latina women were doing the hard labor, the overseer was a white woman named Shannon. And she was a former addict or an addict. I don't think you're ever a former addict. So anyways, we would be back there. Everybody would be sharing their stories. And I wouldn't really share my story. I would share like the contemporary drama that I was going to with like the man who would text me once a week. But I wouldn't share things about like college or, you know, because I was the spoiled brat. You know, like I just knew that they, you know, and these women were sharing their stories and they had horrific stories of abuse, of violence, of neglect. Shannon was an addict and her husband, she found her husband fell through the ceiling because he was getting high in the attic. And I'm like, and I'm sitting there and like my story was, and this is a bad story, right? I recognize like my father dying when I was 19, like that's a sad thing, but they had horrific, I worked next to a Latina woman and she would come in with bruises because her partner was abusing her. And he was like, punching her in the face. And I just was recognizing that like my life is, I'm throwing my life away. I have all of these privileges that I didn't earn. My parents have worked so hard to set me up for a life where I don't have to be in a relationship with a man who's beating my ass every day to pay my rent. And there was another girl, her name was Shanesta, and she said, she was young. She was like 19 at the time. And she said, I want to go to college, but my mom won't fill out the financial aid form, so I can't get financial aid. And it really just being back there with those women was so humbling, and I learned so much. And I just realized that, like, there's no reason for me to take for granted all of the stuff that's working in my favor. Being with those women, hearing them talk about their stories, the poverty and abuse, and the way that people demonize the poor, but they couldn't go to the dentist and they couldn't go to the doctor. And it's like, I just had an epiphany moment where it was like, Kimberly, you really gonna squander this shit? All this, you have been set up in your life to succeed. These women are trying to claw their way out from circumstances that you will never know. And you gonna squander that shit? Stop it. So, I had like a wake up moment, and it was after I think like a month or two of therapy, and that really changed my life, and it helped me acknowledge like what I was doing, and my anxiety, and my patterns of avoidance, and the childhood trauma that I'd experienced, why things had just shaken out for me the way that they had, and why I had a complete and utter mental breakdown. It wasn't just about my father's death. It was about all this other stuff that I had been suppressing. I've been suppressing that stuff for those 20 years. And then this inciting incident of my father's death, just the house of cards came tumbling down. And so thankfully I found a great therapist, happened to be a Black woman. We worked through that stuff. She, gave me some straight talk, and, she was compassionate when she needed to be compassionate, kind and empathetic when I needed that, but also was like, sometimes she'd just be like, you're bullshitting me. And sometimes I need that. And it was great. It was really, really great. And then finally, I became after 6-8 months, I was like, oh, okay. For the year and a half before that, I was just, doggy paddling to keep my head above water. I was very depressed. So depressed that one time my mom threatened to send me to a mental hospital because I didn't want to get out of bed, which was not the right. That's one of the reasons why I was so pissed off with her. And so I want to use the word disgusted, but that is the right word, but it feels harsh. But I was just so, as appreciative I am for the support and the guidance, I was disgusted and disappointed and angry at the way that she handled the very real mental illness that I was dealing with at the time. Because that was a real thing. And after I had to get a letter from my therapist after I'd been in therapy for 6 months. So this is like, we're at now, the timeline is like 18 months out from being politely asked to not return in the fall, right? And the thing is, I was eligible to return after 2 semesters, 1 year, but my shit wasn't together. And my therapist wrote a letter that she was going to send to the college, and my mom read the letter, and the letter just talked about some childhood trauma stuff and how we had worked through the childhood trauma and how I was now in a stable place, how I was good and mentally healthy and ready to go. And my mom read the letter, and she got mad at me because in the letter, my therapist had said, Kimberly's familial foundation is unsound. And that has had a negative effect on her ability to process these really tragic and devastating events. That's the truth. That's the truth. I did not have a family foundation where we talked about tragedy. We never talked about my father's death. Not with my mom, we didn't talk about that. Not with my sister. Never discussed it. It's fucking weird. But that was just representative of how we dealt with all of the issues in our family. Nobody talks about it. Whatever. And she was mad because that was in the letter and she felt like it reflected poorly on her. Well, yeah, it does reflect poorly on you, but sometimes you're poor. And I was just so upset that instead of recognizing what I was trying to get through and what I was trying to go through, that she made it about her and her hurt feelings and how she comes off bad. And I'm like, my father died when I was a teenager. My life got derailed. But I'll say, I definitely do have a parent. My mother definitely is one of those old school Black parents that's like, parenting is making sure that you have a place to stay and making sure that you have food to eat every day. Parenting is not more than that, but parenting is more than that. I needed more than that. And so she took it really personally, and I just was like really disgusted by that. But by that time, by the time that my tenure at Ross was over, and my tenure, and by the way, I didn't have when I was working at Ross and I was working at Payless and all these places, I didn't have a car. So I was like walking, and they have very limited, in the place that I live, they have very limited public transportation. So I was relying on that raggedy public transportation, walking so much. I was so skinny. I shouldn't bring that up, sorry. But like, I was living a struggle life. It's so funny to think back now. I was struggling. And it's so funny to tell these stories now because people are like, you did that there? Yeah, I did. And that's why it was so important. It was so humbling. It was such a reality check. It made me so thankful and so appreciative for everything. And it's made me so much more empathetic to people who have less than I do. Because that's a hard fucking life. It's a hard life. Making $5-6 an hour. Hard work. That's the hardest. The Ross job was the least I've ever been paid for anything. It is the most difficult job I've ever had. The fact that I get paid good money now to sit and just talk about things. Girl. That's why when people like Ben Shapiro be out here being like, no, the poor don't need Medicaid. The poor don't need any more help. They need to get off their lazy asses. I'm like, Ben Shapiro is the height of privilege. You don't know. You do not know unless you're really eating lunch with people who don't have nothing, who don't have any hope. Seeing them every day, hearing their story. It's like, you don't know. I do kind of feel like when I look back at that time, I do sometimes feel like it's like an episode of like Undercover Boss. Have you ever seen that show? Where like, I wasn't the boss, but like or maybe it's like ATL, when like Nunu is kind of pretending to be, she's trying to pretending to be like one of them. That's kind of how I was feeling. Because I was pretending not to be super spoiled brat privileged. And I was that. And I knew that I couldn't tell them about my life because they would just be like, bitch, what the fuck is wrong with you? And I wasn't ready for that. Okay. Now I can look back and be like, bitch, what the fuck? But yeah, that's what my life was at the time. Walking everywhere, hot sun, I live, oh my God, the summers when you have to walk a mile or two, it was didn't have any money, broke as hell, walking everywhere. It was crazy. It was a crazy time. But eventually fulfilled the requirements. And also around that time was when Harvard started to call and be like, are you sure you don't want to come back? And I realized that one of the reasons why they did that is because they, a big deal for like college rankings, US News and World Report, is it the rate of attrition or retention rate? It's like the percentage of people who get their degree within 6 years. And those 6 years were about to be up if I didn't like re-enroll. And so they started to call me and be like, yeah, like, reapply, like you can come back. And so I was like, okay, well, that's another sign. Like, they're calling me to encourage me to come back. And yeah, I got all my ducks in a row and made plans to get the fuck out, you know? Time had run my course. That horrible, horrific relationship with the nigga who wasn't shit. I mean, it was horrible. He was horrible. And we were like sneaking to like, you know, and he didn't have any place to live for real. And we were just sneaking to like do it in different places. It was really horrible. It was really horrible. And it's like when you're having sex that like isn't fun for you, you're just having it just to have it. And like then you're like doing it in weird places because you can't, I live with my mom and like he didn't have any, it was like horrible. It was horrible. Like, ew. But you know, I had to do it to know not to do it. But you know, we all have those freaking horrendous relationships. But anyways, I was mentally healthy. I was stable. I had fulfilled the requirements, and then I reapplied. Oh, another thing was I had to clear out the debts or something. For some reason, I had some like, I don't know if it was like a student loan. Because after you're out of college for like 1 year, your student loan payment starts to kick in. And I wasn't paying that because I was broke and irresponsible. So then I had to be like, ooh, by the way, my student loans, and the thing was like, you can't enroll at Harvard unless you're up to date on your student loan payments. And I was like, oh, okay, so I've done all this other stuff. The bad news is that I don't know, super behind on my student loan payments back to the university, and they're gonna say that I can't enroll. And so that became another drama of like, bitch, really? Really, girl? Yeah. But anyways, I have all sorts of, somebody asked me about, and I mentioned in one podcast about how I, you know, was sleeping, I have slept with a married man before. That was the time when I was working at the dry cleaner. A man came in and my self-esteem was really low, and he asked me out, and we went out, and he was like, he was old, he wasn't attractive. We went to one date at Applebee's, and then we went back to his, he was like an insurance person, and we went back to his hotel after that one date at Applebee's, and then we like hooked up, and then I just remember snooping and just realizing like, oh, this is a married person. I feel like I'm 75% sure that he was married. Because I like saw like a ring. I just was like, okay, Kim. Okay, Kimberly. Like, what the fuck? So anyways, got to do, you know, men be lying. Men are lying. And I was sexually inexperienced. I was insecure. I was depressed. I was not in the right frame of mind to do any kind of due diligence. So yeah, that's my story of how I'm pretty sure I hooked up with a married man. You know, one night stands are not my thing. They weren't really my thing then, but I was just looking for validation through sex. It wasn't good. So I think that that's like the end of that story. Sent everything back in, got the green light. I remember that just being like such a triumphant moment. And by then, for Harriet, I haven't talked about the fact that over those 2 years, for Harriet, kind of became a thing. So, you know, my mom, God love her, would see me on the computer all the time and just be like, this is never gonna, you're never gonna be able to do anything with this. This isn't gonna help you in the future. What are you doing? You're wasting your life. But in my mind, as I said before, I've always had the vision. I always knew that it was possible to have a successful website for progressive, forward-thinking Black women. I always just knew it's possible. If Essence can be a thing, then For Harriet can be a thing. And there was also this thing called the Crunk Feminist Collective. And I was like, yeah, I really like what they're doing, but I want to do it like on a bigger scale, but also less academic-y. I wanted it to be more accessible. And so it's like, okay, well, we'll meet in the middle. So For Harriet was getting an audience and like making a little bit of money. A little bit of money in ads, not like anything real. I would say maybe like $500 a month, you know, not a whole bunch of money. But I was like, oh, that was the time where I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. That was the time. Those 2 years is when I was like, I'm going to make stuff. This is it. And I'm going to work for myself and we're going to make it work. There's something there. That was so important for me. Now, I was still lying and saying that I was going to go to grad school and be an African American studies professor because I didn't want to hear no shit about it. But in my mind, I always at that time was like, no, this is going to be it. I guess that's like a theme for me. Like, before I became really comfortable just being honest and like not, because I used to live for validation, And so I just lived for people telling me, oh, you're doing great and you're so smart and everything is awesome, and obviously I wasn't getting that anymore after I failed out of school. But I still wanted to get that validation of, oh, that's so impressive. So I would lie and tell people that I wanted to be an African American studies professor because like that's a real thing and like it's prestigious. And I definitely come from a family and a community of people who like are obsessed with education, like education is the way that we rise up, like they're very much those kinds of people. And so I was like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna get a PhD. Lies, Kimberly. So yeah, but in my mind, I knew that I wanted this to make this thing happen, and I knew that it was possible. And then I went, is there anything else that I'm missing from this story? Yeah, church. And I was still big into super religious. We've gone church, we've gone dating, we've gone social life. I only really remained close-ish with one person that I really befriended during that time. And her name is also Kim, and we also have the same birthday, except she's 5 years older than me, which is crazy. Isn't that nuts? And she is Black PhD and lives in Dallas. But everybody else, they kind of fell by the wayside because I just couldn't trust them. I was so hurt. And let me just say, that experience of somebody telling me they don't like you and they talk shit about you. If I hadn't had such fulfilling relationships with Black women from Harvard, I can imagine that being a situation where I'd be like, oh, I hate Black women. They're so nasty and they're so mean and so catty. But thankfully, I'd had such a genuine, soul ties, like, not the fake Christian soul ties, but real soul ties with other Black women who got me and told me I was good. And also during that time when I was isolating myself because I was seeing my friends flourish and get into grad school and get these great jobs and go off and start their adult lives. And I was so ashamed and so embarrassed, and I was like withdrawing from them because I didn't want them to know, like, oh yeah, I'm working at a dry cleaner or I'm working at Ross or whatever. And so I wasn't being honest with them. I wasn't keeping in touch with them. I wasn't returning messages or whatever. And they proactively like reached out and sent me care packages and all of that. And so that's how I am so sure that those are like my real friends, because they didn't have to do that. And if I didn't have that, then maybe I would have a bad taste in my mouth about Black women are so catty or what. And it's like, but no, I have lots of counter messages to that, So some people are nasty and catty and evil, and some people are supportive and great, So I'm really glad that I didn't fall into the anti-Blackness trap that I think a lot of Black folks get wrapped up in. Do I have anything else to say about this? You know what I'll say? I am so grateful that I was forced to go to therapy. I am. Therapy helped me be more empathetic to my mother. I realized that she just didn't have the tools to be the mother that I needed. And so, but at that time, I still hadn't completely let go of all the anger and all the pain. But at least I had the recognition that I was suffering because she was suffering. And that's important. That was an important first step. And like, her life turned out completely different from what she'd imagined it to be, because she happened to marry these men who weren't great for her and whatever. So that was an important first step. And I got to work through a lot of my childhood traumas and anxieties. And, you know, for a long time I didn't date, didn't want to mess with men at all. And my therapist was like, you talk about men, you know, in a way that, she was like, are you straight? And I was like, really had to sit with that and just be like, she's like, you have like a childish kind of aversion to men. And I really had to sit and like think about that and be like, am I straight? Because she didn't say it like in an accusatory way. She was like, what's going on there? And then I was like, yeah. And I really thought about it. And I was like, am I attracted to women? Do I want to have sex with women? You know, let me think about this in my mind. And no, I'm not. And so she's like, okay, well, if you are straight, then we need to focus on working through this intimacy stuff with men and you know. And so we worked through it. Now, it led me into some shitty stuff. But I think that that's like the tail. I mean, I wasn't, as I said earlier, I had to do it to know not to do it. You know, I made some mistakes, you know, kissed some frogs. But, yeah, but now I'm in a great place. So, you live and you learn. Yeah, and you become better and you become smarter and more emotionally aware, and then you can make better choices. And I think I make much better choices about lots of different things. My instincts are just better. Professionally, in my family life, in dating, I just have better instincts because I am less likely to operate from a place of hurt. You know, that's not my first go-to. Now, it's in there. You know, some of that stuff, look, if your child is fucked up, you're gonna be fucked up. I say this all the time. But you can work through it. And I've worked through a lot of stuff. And I'm so glad, this is what I meant to say. I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to work through that stuff as a 20-something person. Because there are people who never worked through it. Or they don't even start working through it until they're in their 40s or their 50s. I'm so glad that I was carrying all this stuff. I was just, you know, burdened by all this stuff. And I was just like faking it. Even before I had an emotional breakdown and was politely asked to not return to Harvard in the fall. I was still carrying around all this stuff, but I was pretending like I was cool and it was okay and nothing fazed me. And having the opportunity to go to therapy, let that stuff go. So being able to move through the rest of my 20s and into my 30s and being unbound by that, to be unburdened from it, that is it makes me sad that everybody doesn't get that. Because it's an enormous gift. This is a long ass video and I haven't even really done shit. This is where I am. So I guess we'll have to come back and finish. Thank you guys for watching. You know what I'm gonna do? If you need to go to therapy and you can't afford the copay, send me the bill and I'll pay for a month of somebody's therapy. 1 month. So if you don't have the money and you have a therapist and you need help, send me a message and I'll pay for it. Yeah. Okay. That's all. That's all I have to say about that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time. My nose is stuffed up. I'll see you next time. Bye.